It was supposed to be a reset, a weekend to breathe. My ex. Well, back then he was still my boyfriend. Cal and I were in our early 20s, barely holding it together between school stress, part-time jobs, and the kind of petty fights that always feel more intense than they are. We'd both been dragging ourselves through the weeks, and one night after a particularly bad argument over dishes and deadlines, we made a pact. No matter what, we'd get out of the city. Just us, no phones, no expectations. So instead of blowing cash on a motel weekend or bar hopping in Asheville, we decided to retreat into the woods. Cal had found a loop off the Appalachian Trail near Little Pine, West Virginia. Supposedly quiet, scenic, and just remote enough to lose the noise but not ourselves. Sounded perfect. The plan was simple. I'd finish my shift at the diner on Friday, we'd drive straight to the trailhead, hike in a few miles, and crash at one of the designated shelters near the ridge. Then spend Saturday hiking and Sunday easing out. Easy. Romantic, even. Of course, nothing ever starts exactly the way it's supposed to. I didn't get out of work until 4:15. The Friday rush decided to turn into a full-on festival of chaos. 2 birthdays, 1 walkout, and a toddler who smeared ketchup across the floor like it was finger paint. I was already tempted to cancel, to fake a migraine or say I lost my boots. But Cal showed up in that beat-up Subaru, windows down, his hair a wind-blown mess, grinning like a kid who just found an old treehouse. And I couldn't back out. I didn't want to. We tossed gear into the trunk, 40 pounds of food, extra socks, a propane burner, a speaker, and because we're not saints, a decent stash of pre-rolled joints, and hit the road. By the time we reached the trailhead, it was nearly 5:30. The sun was already starting to slide behind the hills, casting everything in that warm, golden haze like the world was holding its breath. We laced up our boots, adjusted the aluminum frame packs that dug into our shoulders like vices, and started the climb. The first leg absolutely kicked our asses. Straight uphill. No switchbacks. Just mud and roots and rocks that laughed at every step we took. My thighs burned, my hoodie stuck to my back, and Cal kept trying to make jokes that I was too out of breath to laugh at. After about an hour of slow, sweaty ascent, we passed the first shelter, a 3-walled log cabin built into the hillside. It looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, minus the mold and the raccoon droppings. But we kept going. Cal wanted to make it to the ridge campgrounds, said the view was worth it. I trusted him. Mostly. Then the sky opened. No warning. Just a sudden, wild downpour that turned the trail into a slip and slide. Fog rolled in so thick it felt like walking inside a steam room. Our boots were caked in clay. My socks squelched. And still we pushed forward. By the time we reached the fork near the ridge, where the trail split toward either the viewpoint, the campsites, or the secondary shelter, we didn't even have to talk about it. We both looked at each other, soaked to the bone, chafed, cold, and nodded. Shelter it was. We found it tucked beneath a grove of pines, the outline barely visible through the mist. No lights, no noise. At first glance, it looked empty, and I practically moaned in relief at the idea of peeling off my wet hoodie and collapsing into a dry corner. But as we turned the corner, headlamps flickering against the damp wood, we froze. Inside, under a makeshift tarp and surrounded by gear that looked like it had been through a war, were 2 people. An older man and woman, probably in their late 60s or early 70s. They were huddled close, sharing a flask and petting a small, scrappy dog that looked equal parts adorable and possessed. "Evening," the man said. His voice was calm, easy. "You 2 look like hell." "Feel worse," Cal replied, laughing awkwardly. "Mind if we crash in here for the night?" "Plenty of space," the woman said. Her voice was high, almost sing-songy, and her eyes didn't quite match the smile. "We don't bite. Not anymore." I didn't know what to say to that. We dropped our packs and started peeling off layers. My soaked shirt clung to me like saran wrap. Cal tossed me a microfiber towel, and I stripped down to my sports bra without even thinking about it. I caught the woman. She said her name was Nadine, giving me a look. Not judgmental. More curious. Like she was trying to figure out what kind of story I'd be in. The man, Caleb, though he insisted we call him C, offered us a pull from their flask. Cal took it. I passed. The liquor smelled like it had been distilled in a garage. Turbo, the dog, curled up in my lap without hesitation. His tiny warmth was the best thing I'd felt all day. We made small talk. They said they'd met under unconventional circumstances, which Nadine later clarified, with a wink and a sip from her bladder pack, as an affair that turned into a permanent escape from their real lives. She laughed like it was the best punchline in the world. I smiled, but something in me tightened. Nadine looked off. Her hair was a mess of uneven gray clumps, like she cut it herself with scissors meant for cardboard. Her glasses were massive, round, and magnified her eyes to cartoonish proportions. Her teeth, well, they looked like she'd chewed on pennies for decades. But C was different. Calm. Measured. Dad-like, almost. The kind of man you could imagine coaching Little League and knowing how to repair a carburetor. I noticed Cal drifting into conversation with him about fishing and gear and trail hacks while Nadine leaned in toward me. "Tell me a story," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Tell me a story," she repeated, this time lower. Her hand brushed my arm, too long, too lingering. "I like hearing them from pretty girls." I tried to laugh it off. Cal and I met on a hiking app. Match for masochists, right? That was a mistake. Her face changed. The smile evaporated. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Why would you say that?" she hissed. I paused. "Because you said you two met online earlier." "I thought." "No," she snapped. "No, that's not what I meant." I looked toward Cal, but he was still deep in conversation with C. Totally unaware. Nadine's voice dropped again. "I'm a writer," she whispered. "I write stories in my mind. Want to hear one?" "Sure," I said cautiously. She giggled, high-pitched, almost childlike, and began twirling her fingers near her temple like she was stirring a pot of soup. "I'm a writer in my meend," she sang. "Okay." I shifted away, but she followed, whispering nonsense under her breath. Then she stopped suddenly, eyes wide. "What did you just say?" "I didn't say anything," I replied. She stared, then began rocking back and forth, faster and faster, muttering to herself. "Yes, no, maybe, but wait, no way, yeah, no wait, huh? I'm coming out, I'm coming out, I'm coming out." Her voice rose to a shout, echoing off the shelter walls. Turbo barked once, then hid under a tarp. Cal finally looked up. "What the hell?" Nadine flung her arms in the air, eyes rolling back. "I'm calling it. It's witchcraft." C stood, his calm mask cracking. "That's enough, Nadine. Into the bag." She ignored him. He barked it this time. "Now." She collapsed into a heap next to him, giggling and shivering, mumbling spells or songs. I couldn't tell. By now, the temperature had dropped into the 30s. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I whispered to Cal, "We need to leave. Now." We waited another few minutes, hoping she'd pass out. But then Nadine sat up again, locked her eyes on us, and said in a low, guttural voice, "What did you give me?" C startled. "What are you talking about?" She slapped his arm. "What did you give me?" Then her eyes found us again. "What did he give me?" she screamed, pointing at Cal. I stood, heart in my throat. She looked possessed, pupils so wide the whites vanished. She stared like she was watching us from inside a nightmare. "What did you give me?" she whispered again. "Was it acid? Did you guys dose me?" "No," I said, voice cracking. "We didn't give you anything." She stared for a long beat, then flopped back down. 5 minutes later, she sat up again, cross-legged, hands on her knees, staring directly at us without blinking. We grabbed our packs in silence and backed out of the shelter. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. We hiked half a mile in the dark, through mud and fog, and pitched our tent in a random clearing. No tarp, no stakes. Just collapsed into it like survivors of a shipwreck. I didn't sleep. Every crack of a twig felt like Nadine crawling on all fours through the trees, whispering about witchcraft and stories and acid. I'm not what you'd call outdoorsy. I mean, I can handle a trail, and I own hiking boots that aren't just for Instagram, but you won't catch me scaling cliffs or drinking from a creek with my bare hands. So when I signed up for a summer immersion program at Ridgecrest University in western North Carolina, I didn't exactly expect to end up on a 6-mile hike through the Appalachian Mountains. But peer pressure is a hell of a drug, and one very persuasive girl named Talia said, "It'll be fun. You'll just sweat a little and feel alive." I wanted to impress her. So of course I said yes. We were about 2 hours into the hike when it happened. Up until then, everything had been textbook gorgeous. Rolling hills, trees that looked like they'd been painted on, and a sky so blue it made your teeth hurt. I'd taken too many pictures already, mostly of Talia laughing at something stupid our friend Leor said, her head thrown back, teeth catching the light. We were in a clearing, taking a break. Everyone sat in circles, chewing on protein bars and swigging lukewarm water. I tried not to look like I was dying, even though my thighs were screaming and my back felt like it had been personally insulted by my backpack. Talia was lying next to me in the grass, close enough that her arm brushed mine every time she moved. I wanted to say something clever, maybe flirt a little, but the words got stuck somewhere between my dry throat and my pounding heartbeat. Then we heard it, a soft rustle off to the left. Not dramatic, not like a horror movie jump scare, just leaves shifting. Probably a squirrel, I thought. Or a deer. Leor was mid-sentence about some band I'd never heard of when our guide Seth, who normally oozed this whole mountains are my temple vibe, lowered his voice to a whisper and said, "Don't move." The way he said it made my blood go cold. He wasn't joking. He wasn't being dramatic. He was dead serious. And when a guy who laughs at lightning strikes suddenly freezes, you listen. I stopped breathing. My eyes slid toward the trees, slow as syrup. And then it stepped out. A black bear. Not a cartoon. Not a zoo bear. A real, living, breathing tank of fur and muscle, just strolling into the clearing like it paid rent. It was maybe 20 feet away, massive and silent, its nose twitching as it caught our human scent, or worse, our snacks. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was frozen, my body locked in place like a statue made of sheer panic. The bear looked right at me. I don't mean glanced in my direction. I mean full eye contact, like it saw me and knew something about me that I didn't. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. I could feel the sweat running down my back, soaking through my shirt. I didn't dare blink. Then it started walking toward me. Not charging, not snarling, just lumbering casual. Like I was interesting, like I might be lunch. It came close, so close I could smell it. Earthy, musky, and sharp. It sniffed the air near my face, and I swear it leaned in like it was curious. Its breath brushed my cheek, warm and humid. My entire body screamed in silence. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I didn't move. I didn't even twitch. Talia was frozen too, her hand inches from mine, fingers trembling. The bear shifted, turned its head, and stood up. I didn't know black bears could do that. I thought only grizzlies did the whole horror movie towering over you thing. But this one rose up, 6 feet of raw power casting a shadow over me. I could barely feel my legs. My vision tunneled. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die in front of the one person I'm trying to impress. And I'm going to pee myself while doing it. Then something insane happened. It turned away. Just like that. Like I wasn't worth the effort. Like I passed some kind of test. It dropped back on all fours and ambled over to Leor, who had a sandwich in his lap. The bear sniffed it, wrinkled its nose like it was offended, and walked over to Talia. I thought I might pass out. It sniffed her too, her cheek, her neck, and for one terrifying moment, she flinched. Just a little. And the bear paused. But it didn't react. Just kept sniffing, then turned and walked off into the woods, disappearing as easily as it had arrived. For a second, none of us moved. Then the air rushed back in, and everyone exhaled at once. It sounded like 20 people resurfacing after being held underwater. Seth didn't say anything. He just looked around, eyes wide and searching. Then he muttered, "We're cutting the loop short." No one argued. We hiked back in silence, feet dragging, eyes darting to every rustle. Later that night, back at the dorms, we all sat in the common room, still buzzing. Everyone had their own version of the story already, adding flourishes, exaggerating distances. But I couldn't stop thinking about the moment it looked at me, the way it stood over me. The strange, intimate terror of it. Talia sat next to me, legs crossed, sipping tea like she hadn't just been inches from death. She leaned in and whispered, "You didn't scream." "I totally thought you would." I shrugged. Too scared to scream, I think. She smiled. "That's kind of hot." I blinked. "What?" Her smile widened. "That you kept your cool. I don't know, made me feel safe." My mouth went dry again, but for a totally different reason. "Want to go for a walk?" she said. We ended up strolling around the quad under the stars, the air still tinged with adrenaline, and just enough chill to make her press against my side. We didn't talk about the bear. Not really. It felt like something sacred, like a secret only we shared. When she kissed me, soft and slow, hands in my hair, I felt it again. That same wild pulse. That same full-body alertness. Like being seen. Like being chosen. And yeah, I know it sounds insane. But sometimes, you don't need years to feel close to someone. Sometimes it only takes a bear. It was supposed to be a 4-day hike through a quiet stretch of the Appalachian Trail with 2 of my closest friends, Mason and Eli. We were all in our late 20s, burned out from work and desperate for something that didn't involve emails, spreadsheets, or fluorescent lights. Our plan was to get deep into the trail, 20 miles in at least, set up camp near a river we'd marked on the map, and just be. You know, hike, eat, sleep, exist. Nothing complicated. And for 2 days, that's exactly what it was. We were sore, blistered, and eating a truly disgusting amount of peanut butter, but we were happy. The air was clean, the silence was rich, and at night, we'd roast hot dogs over the fire and tell stories under the stars. But on the 3rd day, we ran out of protein. We still had trail mix and some backup granola, but the real food, the stuff we needed to keep our energy up, was gone. So we made the call, take a quick detour to the closest town, grab supplies, and head back. That detour? That's where things went off the rails. We'd been following a map that marked a town roughly 7 miles west. But instead of backtracking along the trail, we figured we could save a little time by cutting over this hill that looked manageable on the elevation chart. Spoiler, it wasn't. The incline was brutal, and just as we hit the top, a thick fog rolled in like a tidal wave. It spilled over the ridge and swallowed everything. Visibility dropped to maybe 5 feet. The temperature plummeted. I was behind Mason, and within seconds, I couldn't even see the straps on his pack. We tried to stay positive, cracking dumb jokes and referencing horror movies in that way you do when your brain is low-key panicking. But then we stumbled across something that shut us up real quick. Lamb carcasses. A dozen of them. Tiny, delicate bodies, perfectly intact. No signs of scavengers. No visible wounds. Just dead. And just as we were processing that, we saw it. A structure barely visible through the fog. A house. Or maybe a cabin. Built into the hillside with moss growing along the roof, and windows fogged over with grime. No driveway. No path. No tire tracks. Just trees, rocks, and this forgotten building in the middle of nowhere. At first, we were relieved. Shelter. Maybe help. But the closer we got, the weirder it felt. There was a gate, made of snapped branches tied together with shoelaces, and what looked like wire from an old coat hanger. Eli tried to push it open, but the whole thing collapsed in his hands like it was held together with hope and spit. In the center of the clearing was a tree, and hanging from its branches were objects. Toys. A mangled Hot Wheels car. A pink plastic hairbrush. A faded tennis ball. A cracked action figure. All arranged in a rough circle around a moldy wheelbarrow filled with waterlogged books and VHS tapes. It wasn't just messy. It was curated, like someone had built a shrine out of junk. I was the first to approach the house. My hand felt heavy, like it didn't want to knock. But I did. 3 times. The sound echoed against the wood, dull and hollow. No answer. I peeked through a grimy window near the doorframe. Inside, I could just barely make out shelves stacked with mismatched items, doll heads, soup cans, a box of chalk, and what looked like a baby's shoe. I turned to Eli, ready to say, "Let's get the hell out of here." But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring through the other window. Frozen. His face had gone ghost white, lips parted, pupils blown wide like he'd just seen something out of a nightmare. I asked, What is it?" He didn't answer. Just shook his head, slow and trembling, then turned and bolted, straight through the clearing, over the collapsed gate, and into the woods. I chased him, heart pounding, yelling his name. It took me 5 minutes to catch up. He was hunched over, hands on his knees, breathing like he'd just run a marathon. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." We made it back to our camp just before sunset. Mason was already there, building a fire, completely unaware of what we'd just seen. Eli didn't say a word. He just sat by the flames, staring into them like he was trying to burn the memory out of his brain. Later that night, after we'd eaten and the fire had burned low, I finally asked, "What did you see?" Eli didn't speak at first. Just ran his hand through his hair, then pressed his palms against his knees. "There was someone in the house," he said, standing behind the glass, watching us. Their face was wrong, like it had been beaten or melted. I couldn't tell if they were alive or... He stopped. Swallowed. But that's not what got me. He looked up at me. They looked terrified. Not angry. Not threatening. Just horrified. A chill ran down my spine. "And the worst part," he added, "I don't think they were alone." We left before sunrise. Didn't even finish our cider. Just packed everything in silence and hiked until our legs gave out. I never reported the house. Never looked it up. Part of me still wonders if it was even real. If you've ever hiked the Pine Cloud Mountains in late October, you know the air up there doesn't just cool you. It cuts. thin, biting, and dry like it's been filtered through bone. My name's Jonah, and for 5 years straight, I led a group of friends on a 4-night loop through a section of the Appalachian Trail that snaked through western Virginia. It was tradition, a sacred little escape. We always aimed for the last weekend of October, when the trees went full fire, crimson, copper, gold, and the nights were just cold enough to make your breath visible, but not freeze your boots solid. There's a ridge up there called Iron Horn, tallest point in that part of the range. You can see for miles on a clear day, all the way down into the hollows where the pines grow so thick the ground never fully dries. That year, we had the whole damn mountaintop to ourselves. 12 of us, all in our late 20s or early 30s. We'd managed to snag the entire shelter on the summit, a 3-walled wooden structure that looked like it had been built during the Civil War and barely maintained since. No one else was around. No tents. No distant headlamps. Just us, the wind, the trees, and the stars. We were drunk on it, on the silence, the altitude, the cider weed spiked with whiskey. It felt like we were suspended between worlds. That was the night I met the man on the pass. Let me rewind a little. Iron Horn has 2 main lookout points, east and west, with a narrow half-mile trail between them called the pass. It's a tight ridge path, barely wide enough in some spots for 2 people to walk side by side. One misstep, and you're tumbling down into a ravine so steep they had to install rope grips in some sections. The plan had been to catch sunrise from the eastern point. We'd all agreed. Wake up around 5, drag our sleeping bags over, and watch the sun crawl over the blue ridge like a live painting. Except we didn't sleep. We stayed up too late, talking about life, work, breakups, and regrets. Some of us passed out in the shelter early. Others wandered off to stargaze. Me? I couldn't stop thinking about Ruby. She'd been part of our group for 2 years, and something had shifted between us on this trip. It wasn't just the firelight dancing in her eyes, or the way she laughed when the wind tried to steal her hat. It was the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Like she saw past my jokes and layers, and into something raw I hadn't shown anyone in a while. We hadn't kissed. Not yet, but we'd lingered. And that night, after everyone else was wrapped in sleeping bags or muttering in their dreams, I found myself wide awake, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the elevation. That's when Taylor, my closest friend since high school, sat up, rubbed his eyes, and whispered, "You still want to catch the sunrise?" I nodded. "Let's go now. Beat the fog." We grabbed our headlamps and bear spray, zipped up our jackets, and headed for the pass. The fog hit halfway through. It came in fast. One moment, we were under stars. The next, we were walking through cotton. Thick, wet mist curled around our legs and clung to our faces. Our headlamps barely carved through it, just cones of white slicing into nothing. The trees along the ridge were strange up there, wind-warped spruces and firs, hunched and twisted like old men who'd seen too much. Their branches clawed at us as we moved, and the trail narrowed until it felt like the mountain was squeezing us between stone and sky. We kept talking, quietly, nervously. "This is some Silent Hill shit," Taylor muttered. "Yeah," I said, only missing the creepy foghorn. A branch snapped behind us. We both froze. Then just ahead, our beams landed on a figure, standing in the middle of the trail. No shirt, just a tiny, faded backpack slung over one shoulder like he was heading to gym class. Pale skin, scruffy beard, barefoot. It was maybe 34 degrees at that point. Visibility was garbage. We were hours into the wilderness. And this guy, he wasn't shivering, wasn't blinking, just staring. I instinctively raised the bear spray. "Hey man, you good?" No answer. He just kept looking at us like we were the ones out of place. "Where'd you come from?" I asked. Still nothing. Then he tilted his head and said, "I don't know." "With you, bro?" It wasn't a question. Everything about him was wrong. The way he stood, too still. The way his voice didn't match his face, too calm. Taylor took a half step back. "You out here alone?" The guy looked up toward the trees. I walked from Climber's Ridge. That was nearly 30 miles away. Through some of the roughest terrain in the state. No food. No gear. No coat. Just vibes, I guess. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "I'm being followed by a dog." Taylor and I exchanged a look. "What kind of dog?" I asked, playing along. "Big. Black. Collar's orange." That's when I remembered something. The rangers had warned us at the station about a tagged black bear in the area. One with a bright orange GPS collar. Aggressive. Active. Possibly habituated. This guy had a bear on his tail. and he was probably leading it straight toward our friends sleeping in their bags. I snapped into damage control mode. "There's a cabin," I lied. "Down the slope, about 15 minutes. Staff use it. Heat, snacks, even Wi-Fi." His eyes lit up. Yeah. Follow me." I told him to walk in front of us, just in case. If he flipped out, I figured I could blind him with the headlamp and spray him down. He didn't say much as we walked, just muttered to himself. Sometimes he laughed, low and strange. Sometimes he'd stop and sniff the air like an animal. Every crack of a branch had me on edge. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see a bear barreling through the fog. When we reached the real ranger cabin, thank God it was actually there, I banged on the door until someone answered. A young ranger opened it, sleep still in his eyes. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. They took one look at the man and waved us off. "We've got it from here." Taylor and I practically ran back up the slope. When we got back to camp, everyone was still asleep, blissfully unaware. I crawled into my bag beside Ruby, still shivering. I didn't sleep. Not really. Around 40 minutes later, I got up again. Needed to know they were handling it. When I reached the cabin, the man was gone. The ranger on duty told me they'd logged his name, Thomas Manning. Recently released on parole. History of stalking. Reported missing 3 days ago. He'd made it 30 miles into the mountains with nothing but a pack and whatever was rattling around inside his head. And the bear? Never showed. But some nights, I lie in bed and think about the way he stared at us, like we were already ghosts. And then I think about Ruby. The way she stirred when I came back. The way her hand found mine under the sleeping bag without even opening her eyes. And I wonder what would have happened if we'd slept through it. If that man had kept walking. Right into camp. We left the mountains a day early. Didn't tell the rest of the group why. Ruby and I ended up sharing a motel room on the way back to town. She kissed me in the parking lot, slow and deliberate. "You saved us," she said. "I didn't do anything." "You did," she whispered. "You saw him. You knew." That night, we didn't talk about the trail. We didn't talk about the man. We just held each other like we weren't sure we'd ever get the chance again. When I was 34, I decided I needed to press pause on the noise. I had just wrapped up a brutal contract job, 6 months of caffeine, deadlines, and a boss who thought urgent meant, "You don't sleep until this is done." I was fried. Not even in a cool, burnout genius kind of way. Just hollow. I needed to get away from glass buildings and Outlook calendars. So I planned a solo hike. 2 weeks on the Appalachian Trail. Just me, the trees, and a pack full of freeze-dried meals. I mapped out my route from Shenandoah down to Harper's Ferry and back, picked shelter points, marked every water source. I packed light, tent tarp and hammock instead of a tent, 1 change of clothes, a compact stove, my insulin, type 1 diabetic, and just enough food to stretch 10 days. The rest I'd pick up at resupply points. My wife, Kara, wasn't thrilled. She kept saying, "It's not the woods I don't trust, it's the people." I promised daily GPS check-ins. I even rented a satellite beacon. I wasn't being reckless. It was the 3rd night when things started to shift. The first few days were perfect. Quiet trails, mild weather, and that peaceful rhythm you only get from walking all day and collapsing into a sleeping bag at night. I barely saw another human. Just a couple on day 2, and a solo hiker headed southbound who nodded once and kept moving. By day 3, I was 25 miles from the last paved road. No cars. No voices. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own breath. I made camp near a dry creek bed, cooked rice and tuna on my stove, and watched the sky turn lavender. That night, the wind picked up hard. Around midnight, my tarp shook so violently I thought it was going to rip away. I barely slept. By morning, the clouds had darkened into something heavier. My weather app had said light showers were possible, but this looked like a full-blown storm brewing. So I packed up early and started moving. By 4 p.m., the rain hit. Not a gentle drizzle. A wall of water. My jacket soaked through in minutes, and the trail turned to slick mud. Visibility dropped. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. Every step felt like gambling with gravity. I needed shelter. And fast. About a quarter mile off the main trail, I spotted a rocky outcrop, 2 massive boulders leaning into each other. Between them, a narrow gap. I squeezed through, hoping for a shallow overhang. What I found was a cave. Small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, just tall enough to stand in. Dry. Silent. Safe. At least, that's what I thought at first. I clicked on my headlamp and scanned the space. The walls were rough but worn, like something had passed through here regularly. Near the back corner, I spotted a rolled-up sleeping bag. Clean. Tight. Not abandoned. That's what caught my attention. It wasn't moldy. It wasn't buried in dust. Someone had left it like they planned to come back. I didn't touch it. Next to it was a neat stack of empty food cans. The labels had been peeled off, but they were clean. Washed. Arranged in 2 rows, 5 high. That's not something you do when you're desperate. That's something you do when you live somewhere. I hung my soaked jacket over a rock, sat on my tarp, and ate one of my meals cold. I kept my headlamp on. Even after my eyes adjusted, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There were markings on the walls. At first I thought they were just scratches, random scuffs from animals or weather erosion. But then I got closer. They were names. Dozens of them. Etched in jagged lines. Some with dates. Some with messages. Lost hikers found here. Thank you for shelter. Cold night. Saved me. And then near the floor in all caps. Not alone. I stopped reading. I turned to the back wall. That's when I saw the bones. Cleaned. Arranged. Hung from nails hammered into the rock. Skulls. Rib cages. Tiny jaws, maybe raccoons or foxes. Each piece suspended like it was part of an exhibit. Some had symbols carved into them. Not letters. Circles, slashes, repeating patterns. I'm no anthropologist, but I've seen enough weird internet rabbit holes to know this wasn't accidental. There was a narrow stone ledge along the wall. Tucked into it, a plastic bag. Inside, a notebook. Spiral bound. Water damaged, but still legible in the center. I flipped through it. The entries started normal, dates, meal logs, weather notes. Then they fell apart. Handwriting deteriorated. Words were repeated. Sentences scratched out and rewritten in reverse. One line showed up 3 times on a single page. He waits when it rains. I closed the notebook and put it back exactly where I found it. The cave didn't feel like shelter anymore. It felt like someone's home. Someone who might be coming back. I didn't unpack anything else. I didn't set up my hammock. I sat with my back to the far wall, hiking pole in one hand, bear spray in the other. My boots stayed on. Around 7 p.m., I turned off the headlamp for just a second. Total darkness. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Crunching, wet, slow. Coming up the slope. I clicked the headlamp off again and crouched low, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside the cave. Then I heard breathing. Heavy. Raspy. Close. Something metallic clattered onto the rocks. Not small. Not soft. Like a crowbar or a machete. I couldn't see it. I didn't want to. Then the footsteps shifted. Not away. Around. Like they were circling the entrance. Like they were looking for tracks. I remembered too late that I hadn't concealed my footprints. They were probably still obvious in the mud. Then I heard it. A hum. Low. Off key. Like someone singing to themselves. Not a song. Just sound. Rising and falling like a lullaby sung in the wrong key. It lasted maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 10. Then silence. I didn't move. I stayed pressed against the wall, eyes wide, mouth dry. Eventually, the fog outside lifted just enough for moonlight to filter through. I didn't hear anything else. No retreating footsteps. No sound of someone leaving. Just the wind. And the distant drip of water from the rocks. At dawn, I crawled to the entrance and peeked outside. No one. But the trail of footprints I had left. Gone. Not erased by rain. Smoothed over. Intentionally. Like someone had taken a stick and brushed them away. I grabbed my gear without checking it and bolted. Ran 2 miles without stopping. My legs burned. My lungs screamed. Eventually, I reached a ranger post. The guy on duty looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Mid-20s, cracked lips, sunburned nose. I told him everything. He didn't write anything down. He just nodded slowly and said, "We get folks living out here sometimes. Off-grid. Usually harmless." I asked if they ever checked caves. He said, "Only if someone reports something urgent." I told him about the bones. The notebook. The humming. He asked if I'd seen any active fires or heard gunshots. I said no. He said, "Then they'll probably leave it alone." Just like that. I drove home that night. Didn't sleep. Didn't tell Kara the truth. I said I got sick and came back early. She hugged me and made soup. 3 months later, I saw a news article. Human remains found in Appalachian Trail cave. No name given. No cause of death released. But the photo? It showed the same boulders near the cave mouth. I still have the GPS coordinates in my trail log. I'll never go back there. When I was 28, I finally decided to try solo hiking. I'd done plenty of weekend trips with friends, group campouts, shared flasks, stories by the fire. But after the breakup with my ex, I needed something different. I wanted quiet, sweat, the sound of my boots on soil, and no one else's voice in my ear. So I planned a section hike through Virginia. Just over a week on the Appalachian Trail. From Shenandoah to Harper's Ferry and back. About 90 miles, give or take. I mapped it like a blueprint: shelters, water sources, backup trails. I even borrowed an emergency beacon from my friend Lauren, who'd thru-hiked the year before. Kara, my sister, not my ex, kept saying, "Just find someone to go with you." But I didn't want company. I wanted to see if I could do it alone. The first day was perfect. Cool air. No bugs. Just enough uphill to feel it in your thighs. I saw maybe 2 people, 1 couple, and then some guy heading southbound who barely muttered a greeting. I covered 12 miles and reached the shelter just before sunset. It was a classic 3-walled structure, built into the side of a slope. The kind that smells like pine and mildew. There was someone already there when I arrived, sorting gear, adjusting a stove. Probably late 30s. Lean, with graying stubble and a faded ball cap. "Evening," he said when I dropped my bag. "Hey," I replied. He offered a smile. Not warm. Not cold. We made easy small talk while we ate, gear brands, weather, trail conditions. He said his name was Rick. Told me he'd started one trailhead over and was heading in the same general direction. Said he planned to finish around Friday. Same as me. I didn't think much of it at the time. People overlap on the trail all the time. But now I wonder if he already knew my route. That night, I rolled out my sleeping bag in the far corner of the shelter. Rick took the other side. I kept my headlamp and knife close, like I always do. Habit. I heard him get up once in the night. Just to step outside, maybe to pee. But something about it made me open one eye and listen. Just in case. I left early the next morning, wanting to beat the heat. Rick was still fiddling with his gear. I waved and said I'd see him up the trail. I didn't expect to, but by noon, I heard footsteps behind me. It was him. "Caught up quicker than I thought," he said, flashing that smile again. I forced a polite chuckle. "Yeah, wow. Thought you might be ahead of me." We hiked together for a while. He kept up easily, even with his heavier-looking pack and those old boots that looked more leather than function. I noticed he asked a lot of questions. Casual on the surface. Where was I resupplying? Was my sister still picking me up? Did I hike solo often? What kind of beacon was I using? Could it send messages or just pings? I gave vague answers. My gut was starting to twitch. I've always been good at reading people. And something about Rick was too smooth. Like he was trying to seem relatable. Trustworthy. Like a character someone had rehearsed. So when we reached a trail junction, I said I was going to take the side loop to the overlook. It added a mile but looped back. He nodded. "Cool. I'll just rest here a bit." I stepped off the main trail, turned the first corner, and picked up the pace. Jogged the loop. Fast. Breath burning. Heart pounding. I came back onto the main trail about a mile north, hoping I'd shaken him. But when I got to the next shelter, Rick was there. Already. This time, he wasn't in the shelter. He was setting up a tent just off to the side. "Shortcut through the fire road," he said, like it was nothing. Saved me a bunch of time. There was no shortcut on the map. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and picked the farthest spot in the shelter. That night, I didn't cook. Just ate a cold bar and zipped into my bag early. He didn't talk much either. Just sat by his tent, occasionally looking over. Not staring. Just enough to know I was being watched. I slept in short bursts. Every twig snap made me flinch. Around midnight, I heard leaves being disturbed. Soft, slow movements. Not animal sounds. Circling. Then silence. When I checked my pack in the morning, everything was still there, except my food bag. It hadn't been taken. Just moved. Unzipped. Shifted to the other side. Like someone wanted me to know they'd been close enough to touch it. Rick was gone when I woke up. No trace. No pack. No coals in the fire pit. Just boot prints heading in the direction I'd told him I planned to go. I changed my route. Backtracked a quarter mile and took a connector trail that looped east and rejoined the main path 10 miles ahead. It added 6 miles to my day, but I didn't care. I power hiked, barely stopping for water. By late afternoon, I was coming around a rocky overlook, and there he was, Rick, sitting on the ledge, arms resting on his knees, like he'd been waiting. He waved. That same damn smile. I waved back. Small, tight, and kept walking. Didn't stop. Didn't speak. I didn't sleep that night. Camped off trail in thick brush. No fire. Every sound made my spine curl. In the morning, I made a decision. I wasn't finishing the route. I marked a road crossing on my map, 2 miles west of my original endpoint. If I moved fast enough, I could get there by noon. I stayed off the main trail, used old logging roads and deer paths, anything to avoid being seen. But not long after I started, I heard footsteps behind me, matching mine. Pausing when I did, I stopped, turned. Rick was there, about 50 yards back, pretending to look at a tree. I raised my voice. "Why are you following me?" He smiled. "Just hiking the same trail as you." His eyes didn't smile. Not this time. That's when I saw it. The knife, clipped to his belt. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had been, and he'd just made sure I saw it now. "I've got someone meeting me at the road," I said, loud enough to echo. "My boyfriend. Military." Rick tilted his head. "What kind of car does he drive?" That question. That was when it all clicked. This wasn't random. He hadn't just happened to be on the same trail. He'd planned this. I turned and ran. I didn't stop. Crashed through bushes. Slid down embankments. Scraped my arms bloody against bark. I hit the emergency beacon mid-stride. Hoped to God it sent. After what felt like forever, I heard tires on gravel. A Ranger truck. I ran straight into the road, waving both arms. The Ranger jumped out, caught me before I collapsed. I told him everything. He called it in. Turns out they'd been looking for Rick. Real name, Thomas Manning. Convicted stalker. Out on parole. 2 other women had filed reports in the last month, being followed, watched, harassed. One went missing for a day before turning up shaken and silent. They found Manning's camp a few miles north. Inside, zip ties, maps, notes, descriptions of female hikers, including mine. He'd written under my name. Solo. No signal. Predictable route. That's what stuck with me. Not the knife. Not the smile. But that word. Predictable. I still hike. But never alone now. Jake and I work in engineering. Tight deadlines, fluorescent lights, and the kind of office small talk that makes your soul shrink a little every day. We'd been talking about doing something different for months. Something that didn't involve screens or city noise. Something that reminded us we had bodies and blood and bones. So we planned a weekend hike. Just one night out in the mountains of West Virginia. A short break to reset. Jake found it. Not a marked trail. Not even an official site. Just a thread buried in a forum for backcountry hikers, posted by someone with the username MossEater88. A single blurry photo of an old mining camp, half swallowed by trees, and a set of GPS coordinates. The caption read, "No one goes here anymore. Stay long enough and you'll see why." We laughed it off. That's the thing about warnings. You don't take them seriously until you're too far in to turn around. We got there around noon on a Saturday. The drive up the mountain was barely a road, just gravel and mud, slashed with ruts deep enough to pop a tire. We parked in a pull-off no bigger than a driveway and loaded our packs. There wasn't even a trailhead sign. No markers. Just a gap in the trees. We hiked 2 miles up what looked like a forgotten logging road. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not peaceful quiet. Heavy quiet. Like the trees were listening. Eventually, the woods opened into a clearing. It looked like something from a dream, or a nightmare, depending on your lens. Rusting machines were half sunken into the ground. Gears, metal pipes, broken carts. One wall of an old structure still stood, its bricks crumbling like stale bread. A faded sign, barely legible, said George Hollow Shaft No. 3. On the far end of the clearing, the ground dipped sharply. A collapsed mine entrance, roped off with a fraying boundary line and a rusted sign that read, "Danger. Do not approach." We pitched our tents about 50 yards back. Close enough to see the ruins, but far enough to sleep without dreaming about them. Jake was giddy. He had brought his DSLR and tripod and kept saying, "Dude, these shots are gonna break my feed." I helped him gather firewood while the sun dipped lower. We boiled ramen, drank warm Gatorade, and sat by the fire trading dumb work stories. For a while things felt normal, until I woke up at 3 a.m. to metal. It was faint but sharp. A click, followed by another. Then silence. I lay still, heart thudding. Every horror movie I'd ever watched tried to replay itself in my head. I told myself it was probably just the wind rattling some old junk. Maybe a piece of rusted pipe had finally fallen. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. Jake was already outside when I unzipped my tent in the morning. He didn't say anything, just motioned for me to follow him. We walked past the clearing, into the brush. About 30 yards out, he stopped. Right there, buried beneath a thin layer of dead leaves, was a steel bear trap. Huge, ancient. But when Jake poked it with a stick, the jaws snapped shut with a crack loud enough to make my ears ring. Still functional. Still deadly. It had been placed in the exact spot we'd walked through the day before. We stared at it for a long time. I felt sick. Could have taken a leg off, Jake muttered. Easily. We marked it on GPS and backed away carefully. Didn't touch it beyond triggering it once to be sure it wouldn't spring again. We didn't find any others that morning. But we also didn't go looking too hard. The air had changed. The sky felt lower. The trees closer. That afternoon we barely spoke. Jake still took photos, but he didn't wander as far. I kept glancing toward the tree line, searching for, I don't know, movement, a camera flash, binoculars. We made a decision, no fire that night. Just a quick meal, then sleep in shifts. Jake took the first watch. I dozed, knife under my jacket, every muscle tense. Around midnight, he shook me awake. Something's out there, he whispered. I sat up fast. We turned off our headlamps and listened. There it was. Branches snapping. Not fast. Not clumsy. Deliberate. Moving in a wide circle around our campsite. Jake clutched his flashlight, but didn't turn it on. We waited. 10 minutes. Maybe more. Then silence. The kind that makes your teeth itch. Eventually, the sound stopped. We waited another hour before switching shifts. Jake didn't sleep. Not really. And neither did I. At dawn, we checked the perimeter. That's when we found the second trap. This one wasn't old. It was newer. Cleaner. Set right in the middle of the path we'd used to access the stream. It was partially hidden under twigs and leaves. Perfectly placed. And oiled. Freshly. Jake knelt beside it, hands shaking. This wasn't here yesterday. Someone had come into our camp while we were awake and set it, which meant they were watching us. At that point, we weren't debating anymore. We packed up. Fast. We moved methodically, checking every step, scanning the ground like we were in a minefield. Halfway back to the car, Jake stopped. He didn't say a word, just pointed. About 100 yards away, standing behind a curtain of trees, was a man. Camouflaged. Full hunting gear. Face obscured. Hands hanging loose at his sides. Not moving. Not waving. Just watching. Like we were deer. Jake whispered, "Don't stop. Just keep walking." So we did. We didn't speak again until we saw the car. We didn't report it right away. We were too rattled. Too unsure of what we'd even say. But that night, back at home, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the fresh oil on that trap. The way the man stood perfectly still. Like he'd done it before. Like it was a game. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. Told them everything. The deputy on the phone sounded tired. Said they'd had a few reports in that area. Unmarked mining land. Old property lines. Locals who didn't like visitors. Said they'd look into it. Then he told me something I still think about. If I were you boys, he said, I'd find somewhere else to camp next time. We never went back. Jake deleted the GPS coordinates from his blog. I've always had a thing for wildflowers. Not the kind you buy in a vase or see in curated gardens. I mean the ones that fight their way through cracked rock, bloom for a week, then vanish like they were never there. The fragile, stubborn kind. I guess I saw something of myself in them. When I set out for the Blue Ridge foothills that May, I didn't tell many people. Just my sister, a few co-workers, and my endocrinologist. I didn't want to make a big deal of it. Just a 3-day photo trip. Hike in, set up camp, capture some rare blooms, hike out. Simple. I brought my camera, my glucose monitor, a week's supply of insulin, and enough food to last 5 days. I'd done this a dozen times before. I had a GPS beacon, a trail map, and a good sense of direction. But none of that mattered when the trail disappeared behind me. The first day was perfect. I hiked 6 miles into a lesser-known section of the preserve, where the trails were narrower and the markers less consistent. I'd been tipped off by a botanist friend about a cluster of flame azaleas blooming early. I wanted to catch them before they faded. I set up camp near a creek, took a few test shots, and fell asleep to the sound of rushing water. My blood sugar was stable. My insulin was cool. Everything was fine. The next morning, I wandered off trail to chase a patch of flowers I'd spotted on a ridge. I didn't go far, maybe a quarter mile. But the terrain was steeper than I expected, and I got turned around. By the time I realized I wasn't where I thought I was, it was too late. No trail markers. No familiar rock formations. No cell signal. Just trees. Endless trees. I didn't panic. Not at first. I had food. Water. My gear. I'd find my way back. One wrong turn became two. Then three. Within hours, I was moving in circles. By sunset, I was lost. That first night, I told myself it would be okay. I had my beacon. I pressed the check-in button. It blinked green. No rescue alert yet. I didn't want to overreact. Not until I was sure I couldn't find the trail on my own. I ate a protein bar, checked my blood sugar, injected a small dose of insulin. I told myself tomorrow, I'd find the creek again. I didn't. Days 2 and 3 blurred together. I rationed food, drank from the creek after filtering, tried to conserve insulin. But the heat was rising. My cooler pack wasn't holding temperature anymore. I could feel the insulin going bad, less effective, slower in response. On day 4, I ran out of trail mix and crackers. On day 5, I sent a rescue ping. Nothing happened. Later, I'd find out my beacon had glitched, sent the signal sideways, 3 miles off course. The search teams were looking in the wrong direction. By day 6, I stopped using insulin. It wasn't doing anything but worsening the fatigue. I didn't have the energy for the injections. My blood sugar began to spike. The headaches came first, then the nausea, then the thirst. I stopped trying to hike out. Instead, I built a shelter under a rock overhang, just wide enough to keep rain off me. I stayed near a spring-fed stream, drinking obsessively, though it never felt like enough. My tongue was dry. My vision blurred. I stopped taking photos. Didn't care anymore. Didn't matter. I started talking out loud. To the trees. To the flowers. To my sister, as if she could hear me. "I'm sorry," I whispered once, holding a wilted bloom in my hand. "I should have told you where I was going." I saw lights a few times, flickers through trees that might have been rescue teams, or hallucinations. I called out. No one answered. Day 10. I collapsed while trying to refill my bottle. My legs just stopped working. I lay on my side in the mud, watching ants crawl over my sleeve. I didn't move for hours. Eventually, I crawled back to the shelter. I stopped checking the beacon, stopped counting the days. I dreamed constantly. Vivid, feverish dreams. My mother's hands brushing my hair. The smell of my childhood kitchen. The faces of people I hadn't seen in years. One dream came back again and again. A field of wildflowers. Endless. And I was floating just above them, weightless. No pain. No thirst. Just light. I remember the moment I knew I was dying. It wasn't dramatic. I wasn't afraid. I just felt done. Like my body was a book that had reached its last page. I lay back under the rock ledge, curled under my jacket, and let the breeze wash over my face. I felt small, and strangely free. I whispered, "Let someone find me." Then I closed my eyes. They found me 18 days after I went missing. A pair of volunteers, retired EMTs, saw a glint of metal in the bushes. My stove. They found me curled up, unconscious but alive. I weighed 102 pounds. My blood sugar was over 600. But I survived. Barely. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Another 3 in recovery. I still walk with a limp. And I can't feel 2 toes on my right foot. But I'm here. I went back to that spot a year later. With my sister. We didn't go deep, just to the edge of the preserve. I showed her one of the photos I'd taken before I got lost. A flame azalea, blooming bright against the moss. She looked at me teary-eyed. "You're still here," she whispered. I nodded. "I always wanted to be a wildflower," I said. "But I think I'm the root instead." She smiled and took my hand. We stood there in silence, surrounded by green. Alive. And finally home. I used to think I understood fear. I'd been bluff-charged by a black bear once in Montana. Spooked a nest of yellow jackets in Tennessee, and got stung 23 times before I could scream. Even got caught in a flash flood in Utah that nearly swept my tent into a ravine. but nothing prepared me for the mountain lion that didn't run. I was out in Northern California, working on a long-term predator behavior study for a graduate fellowship. My focus was pumas, solitary, elusive, and typically terrified of people. I'd been tracking one female for weeks using GPS collars and trail cams, collecting data on her territory, kill sites, and resting behavior. We called her F87. She was 6 years old. Healthy. Loner. She'd never been spotted near any developed trails before. Until she was. And until I watched her watch me, with no fear in her eyes at all. I'd set up camp near the southern edge of her range, an area with minimal human traffic, thick undergrowth, and narrow game trails carved by deer. The goal was to observe from a distance, log patterns, and maybe get a few quality camera trap images. On the third morning, I hiked out alone to check a camera I'd mounted on an elk trail a few days earlier. I was maybe 4 miles from camp, moving slow, scanning the ground for tracks, when I noticed the forest had gone quiet. No birdsong, no rustling, just the weight of silence. I stopped walking, waited. Then I saw her, maybe 30 yards uphill, standing between two trees, tail low, head tilted slightly. F87. No radio collar this time. She must have slipped it months ago. I froze. She didn't. She just stared. Her ears weren't back. Her mouth wasn't open. She wasn't crouched. But she didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched me like I was something she hadn't decided on yet. Now normally if a mountain lion sees you, it bolts. They're apex predators, sure, but they're also solitary and cautious. They avoid people. They don't linger. But F87 didn't behave like that. She didn't act like a wild puma at all. I raised my arms slowly. Shouted. Clapped twice. Nothing. She didn't even flinch. I backed away slowly, never turning my back. She followed. Not rushed. Not stalking. Just moving when I moved. Keeping the same distance. Matching me. I made it back to camp in record time. Once I crossed the stream near my tent, I turned to look. She was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every crack of a twig, every gust of wind, my nerves were fireworks. The next morning, I hiked out to the ranger station. I needed to report abnormal predator behavior. What I didn't expect was how fast they believed me. Turns out, I wasn't the first one. A week earlier, a group of campers about 6 miles north had encountered a cougar that approached their fire at dusk. Didn't growl, just watched. Got within 40 feet before one of them fired a warning shot. The same cat, the ranger suspected. F87. But what chilled me was what they found nearby: bones. Not deer bones. Not elk. Chicken carcasses. Ribbed and plucked. Stripped clean. Someone had been feeding her. Probably for months. Maybe longer. It's hard to explain what that does to a predator. Feeding a wild animal, even with good intentions, rewires them. It teaches them that people equals food. Not as prey. Not at first. Just as a source. And when the food stops, they don't forget the face that brought it. They start looking for the hands. For the tent. For the backpack. I returned to my research site the next day, with ranger permission and backup about an hour away. This time I was armed. I didn't want to be. I believe in observed distance, in deterrence, in non-lethal options. But I also believe in not dying in the woods. I checked the camera trap. The SD card was full. So was the bait station, except something had dragged the bait away and left behind a pile of feathers and a crushed trail mix wrapper. A human item. And another thing, a folded paper towel tucked under a rock nearby. I opened it. Inside were bits of raw chicken. Still damp. Still pink. Someone had left it there recently. Not for birds. Not even for scavengers. For her. I packed up the site. I wasn't going to be part of this animal's conditioning. I wasn't going to document her slow decline into dependency. But I stayed long enough to pull the camera footage. And what I saw made my stomach twist. 3 nights earlier, at 2:47 a.m., the camera triggered. F87. She walked into frame. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, ducking low, was a man. No uniform. No gear. Just a hoodie and jeans. He crouched beside the bait pile. Opened a plastic bag. Waited while she ate. Then he reached out. And touched her back. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. Like a house cat. Like a pet. I turned the footage into the rangers. They launched an investigation. But the man was never identified. He'd been feeding a predator illegally, and in doing so had turned her into a danger, for herself and for every human she encountered. They relocated F-87 after she was spotted again near a trailhead the following week. I wasn't told where, but I know what that means. They don't relocate cats like her without a contingency. She was too far gone, too humanized, too dangerous. I still think about her. The way she moved, the way she didn't fear me, how close she got before she was taken away from the woods she belonged to. She didn't act like a predator, until she did. We didn't even want to go camping that weekend. It was one of those last-minute plans, the kind that come together because you're too tired of the city to say no. My best friend, Anya, had just finished her clinical rotation in ER nursing and needed to breathe. I was between freelance gigs, feeling stuck and restless. We wanted something quiet, something beautiful. So we packed up the Subaru, loaded it with gear, and aimed for a national forest 2 hours outside of Asheville. We picked a trail Anya had hiked once before, nothing extreme, just 6 miles out to a primitive site by a ridgeline. No shelters, no cell service, just trees, a fire ring, and the sky. We weren't looking for an adventure. We just wanted to watch the stars. We got something else. The hiking was perfect. The air smelled like pine and damp stone. The trail was soft with old mulch. Every so often, we'd pass a hiker coming out, always with a nod, a smile, that unspoken "you're good" signal that passes between people in the backcountry. About 3 miles in, we passed a man coming the other way. Mid-40s. Tall. Faded camo jacket. Long beard. No pack. That was the first red flag. You don't hike this far without water, at the very least. He had nothing. Not even a day bag. Just his hands in his pockets. He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just stared at us as we passed. His eyes lingered on Anya longer than I liked. We kept walking. Neither of us said anything until we were out of earshot. Then she muttered, creepy. I laughed too quickly. Yeah, definitely not giving park ranger vibes. We didn't talk about him again, but we should have. We reached the site a little before dusk. It was gorgeous, just off the ridgeline, with a sliver of sunset visible through the trees and a mossy clearing big enough for 2 tents. We set up camp, boiled water, made couscous with dehydrated veggies, and shared a flask of whiskey Anya had stashed in her sleeping bag. We talked about her residency, about what it would be like to leave the city for good. The temperature dropped fast. We burrowed into our tents, zipped up, and let the wind lull us to sleep. Anya always fell asleep first. Me? I never do. Especially not in the woods. Around 2:30 a.m., I stirred. Something had changed. The air felt electric, like static before a thunderstorm. Then I heard it. A footstep. Not an animal. Too heavy. Too slow. I held my breath. Another crunch. Closer. Then a whisper. Too faint to hear the words, just the shape of sound. Then silence. I lay frozen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just paranoia. A dream, maybe. But in the morning, Anya looked pale. I think someone walked through our site last night, she said. I didn't tell her I heard it too. We packed up fast. The plan was to hike out and grab breakfast in town. But about a mile into the return, we rounded a bend and stopped cold. There, in the middle of the trail, was a pile of rocks. Stacked intentionally. It hadn't been there yesterday. On top of the stack, dead center, was Anya's bandana. The one she'd tied to her tent pole. It was soaked. We didn't touch it. We just moved past it. Quickly. Neither of us said a word. But our steps got faster. Our conversation died. We stopped looking at the scenery. We just wanted out. We reached the car around noon. Relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. I threw my pack in the back seat and turned the ignition like I was starting a lifeboat. We were less than 10 minutes down the forest road when we saw him again. The man, standing on the edge of the gravel, near a service gate. Same camo jacket. Same vacant stare. This time he smiled. It wasn't friendly. Anya whispered, "Don't stop." I didn't. He watched us pass. Head turning. Eyes locked. Like he knew where we'd been. Knew where we slept. We reported it to the rangers. They took notes. Asked questions. Said they'd keep an eye out. But there wasn't much they could do. No crime. No threat. No photo. Just a weird guy in the woods. It happens more than you think, they said. But that wasn't the end. 3 nights later, Anya texted me at 2 a.m. Someone knocked on my apartment window. She lived on the 2nd floor. She called the police. They found nothing. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. But she moved 2 weeks later. So did I. It's been over a year. We still hike, but never alone. Never without a signal. Never without a way to leave in under 10 minutes. And every so often, I'll catch a glimpse of someone on the trail, just out of focus, just out of reach, and my heart will lock up. It started with a map. Not a digital one. Not some satellite-pulled app with elevation lines and color-coded trails. This was hand-drawn, ink on parchment, edges curled, the kind of thing you find in an archive folder that smells like dust and wood oil. I was helping a retired geographer organize his records. It was supposed to be a side gig, scan label file. Easy work. Quiet. On the third day, I found the map, folded between topo sheets of the Blue Ridge Mountains. No labels. No scale. Just a line of ridges, a few hand-marked XS, and a note scribbled in the corner. Burials confirmed. See ledger. 1873 to 1875. I asked the geographer, Dr. Harmon, what it meant. He looked at it once and said, flatly, that shouldn't be in there. He asked me to leave early that day. I didn't go back, but I kept the map. I didn't intend to hike out there. Not at first. But something about the map lingered. The way the X's were placed. Not symmetrical, but intentional. Like someone had chosen those sites with care. And then there was the word, burials. Not graves. Not cemetery. Burials. It sounded older. Rougher. Secret. So I went. I didn't tell anyone. Just packed my gear, set the coordinates based on the ridgeline sketch, and drove out to a quiet section of the Jefferson National Forest. No marked trails. No campgrounds. I parked off a service road and hiked in. It took me 2 hours to find the first marker. A stone pile. Waist high. Weathered. Covered in moss. Not a cairn. Not a trail marker. Deliberate. I pulled out the map. The location matched the first X. I circled the pile, scanned the area, and noticed something strange. The ground around the stones had been disturbed. Not recently, but not a century ago either. Maybe a few years. I started digging. It didn't take long. Beneath the top layer of stones, about 2 feet down, I hit metal. A box. Old. Hinged. Rusted shut. I pried it open with my trowel. Inside, a map fragment. Identical style. Smaller scale. And beneath it, a bundle of folded papers tied with red twine. I unwrapped them slowly. Diagrams. Coordinates. Handwritten notes in cursive script. And one torn page that simply read, "We did not move the bones." I stood up too fast. The air spun around me. I wasn't sure what I'd found. A forgotten burial? A researcher's field kit? A prank? But then I heard it. A twig snapping. Crisp. Deliberate. I turned. Nothing. Just trees. Still, I packed the box into my bag, marked the spot, and hiked another half-mile before setting up camp. That night, I barely slept. Every gust of wind became a whisper. Every rustle a footstep. The next morning, I hiked toward the second X. The terrain was rougher, steeper slopes, less even ground. I found the site by mid-morning. Another stone pile. This one smaller. Tucked into a hollow between 2 boulders. And next to it, footprints. Not mine. Not fresh, but not old either. Maybe a week. Maybe less. Boot treads. Deep. Someone else had been here. I didn't dig this time. I just took photos. Marked GPS left everything untouched. But as I turned to leave, I saw him. About 60 yards uphill. Standing motionless between 2 trees. A man. Too far to make out his face. Dressed in dark green. Hat pulled low. He didn't wave. Didn't move. Just watched. I blinked. He was gone. I hiked 4 miles back to the trailhead that day. Didn't stop for water. Didn't eat. When I got to my car, I checked the back seat 3 times before starting the engine. I drove straight to the university library. I wanted to know more about the ledger, the years 1873 to 75, anything that might explain what I'd found. I didn't expect to find a match, but I did. A folder of frontier-era land records. 1 page referenced displaced burials during the construction of a short-lived mining operation in 1874. It listed the names of 4 surveyors. One of them, Harmon. Same last name as the geographer I'd worked for. I returned to his house the next morning. It was empty. A for sale sign was staked in the yard. Neighbors said he'd moved out suddenly. No forwarding address. I still have the box. Still have the papers. Most of them are indecipherable, weathered, water-damaged, fragmented. But one note keeps me up at night. It's short, written in pencil, barely legible. Do not open the fourth sight. He is still there. I never found the fourth X. Maybe I didn't want to. Most people think working in wildlife conservation is all majestic animals and sunrise hikes. And yes, sometimes it is. But mostly it's dirt. Long days. Lugging 40-pound packs full of camera gear through mud, rain, and underbrush thick enough to scrape your skin raw. You work alone, you sweat through 3 layers before noon, and you get used to talking out loud just to make the silence feel less complete. Still, I loved it. I was 27, 2 years into my job as a field technician for the state's Department of Wildlife. That summer, I was assigned to a solo monitoring project in a stretch of protected forest up near the Oregon border. My job: install and monitor remote trail cameras to study predator movement, mostly cougars and black bears. The area was remote. No cell towers, no paved roads, no nearby towns. We called it Zone 7A. It wasn't open to campers or hunters. The only people allowed in were wildlife personnel and the occasional forestry crew. In theory, I was alone out there. In reality, I wasn't. I started the deployment in early June. The department gave me a truck, a week's worth of supplies, and a satellite radio for check-ins. I was scheduled to spend 5 days in the backcountry, moving between predetermined camera stations, swapping SD cards, and logging animal activity. The first 2 days were smooth. I spent the mornings hiking between sites, and the afternoons reviewing footage on a tablet. Mostly deer, some raccoons, a few bears. Normal patterns. But at Station 3, something felt wrong. It was the silence at first. Zone 7A was usually filled with ambient wildlife noise: woodpeckers, squirrels, insects. But when I reached that section of the forest, everything was still. Not quiet, dead. I dismissed it. Maybe a nearby predator had spooked the smaller animals. I located the camera, opened the housing, and swapped the card. Standard procedure. I used the tablet to check the last 24 hours of footage. And froze. The camera had been moved. Not bumped by an animal. Not knocked askew by wind. Rotated. Intentionally. The previous footage showed a clear view of the game trail. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the feed jolted. The angle shifted right, away from the trail and toward the trees. Then nothing. No animals. No wind. Just 12 hours of static landscape. I should have pulled the unit and reported it. But I didn't. I flagged the footage, made a note, and moved to the next site. That was my first mistake. By the 4th day, I noticed something else. Tracks. At first, I thought they were mine. But they weren't. Wrong depth. Wider gait. Heavier. Boot prints. Fresh. And not near any of the approved access trails. I found them around Station 5, deep in the interior, a half-day hike from the nearest fire road. They circled the tree where I'd mounted the camera, then vanished into the brush. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe an old ranger trail. Maybe forestry personnel. But I started locking the zippers on my tent at night, and I kept the satellite radio closer. The next morning, I returned to Station 3. I needed to pull the unit and replace it. As I approached, I saw something hanging from the camera housing. A strip of cloth. Torn, faded camo. Tied in a neat knot. I didn't touch it. I reviewed the footage again. Same pattern. At 2:17 a.m., the camera shook. Then a figure. Not an animal. A man. He stepped into frame slowly, tall, lean, wearing a hooded jacket. His face was obscured. He walked straight to the camera, looked into the lens, and smiled. Then he reached up and rotated the unit. The last frame was his hand, clutched around the casing. That was it. No timestamp after that. Just darkness. I stood there in the woods, camera in one hand, heart pounding. I felt exposed, like I'd walked into someone else's space. Someone who wanted me to know they'd seen me, and could see me again, anytime they wanted. I hiked back to base camp faster than I should have. I radioed in, reported the footage, the tracks, the cloth. The supervisor on the other end kept his voice calm, but I could hear the shift in his tone. Stay put. We'll send someone in the morning. I didn't ask why not tonight. I already knew. It was too remote. Too dark. Too late. I was on my own for one more night. I turned on every light I had, lanterns, headlamps, even the emergency beacon's red strobe. I didn't sleep. Just sat in the tent with my knife in my lap, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard something snap, a branch maybe 50 feet off. Then silence. Then another. Closer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Eventually it stopped. Dawn came slow and gray. I packed up camp before the sun fully broke. Left everything but the essentials. I wanted out. Now. The ranger team met me at the trailhead by noon. They reviewed the footage, tagged the area, and promised to investigate. I asked if they'd had other reports in the zone. They hesitated. Then one of them said, "We've had cameras go missing. Sometimes disturbed. Never caught anyone on film before." I nodded. Didn't say what I was thinking. That the man wasn't just passing through. He knew where the cameras were. He knew where I was. And he knew how to avoid being seen, except when he wanted to be. They pulled my project from the area, reassigned me to a different zone near the coast. I didn't argue. But 2 weeks later, I got a call. A ranger I hadn't met wanted to ask about Station 3. Said they found something during cleanup. Another camera. Hidden. Not ours. It was mounted in the trees, angled toward the trail. Battery dead. Card full. The footage showed me. Walking. Working. Sleeping. From a distance. Days of it. Someone had been watching me the whole time. They never caught him. No prints. No ID. Just boot tracks and a camera full of proof. The case was closed as unresolved human interference. They said it was likely someone squatting illegally in the zone. Nothing else to do. But I still think about it. How quiet the forest was. How the animals vanished. How he smiled at the lens like he was proud. And sometimes, when I'm setting up a new trail cam and I hear a branch snap, I wonder, am I really the one watching? Or am I just being watched back?